Good evening and welcome back to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio and now powered by our first sponsor, TireGet.com. That's TireGet.com. You have to buy tires from somebody, you might as well buy them from us and help fund the movement, help support the movement. We all believe in the freedom of movement, and that's exactly what the establishment wants to take from you now. I am your host, Royce White, live in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota, for another incredible episode number 70. I remembered it today, episode number 70. I hope the audio issues were resolved yesterday. We modified the production setup a little bit from a technical standpoint, and we hope that the audio is a bit louder for everybody out there and accommodates everybody out there. Again, please, we appreciate your feedback when it comes to the production side, whether it's audio or visual or whatever the case may be. We think it's solved. It sounds pretty good. I listened back to it during the live feed. And then YouTube, YouTube also compresses the audio some. So it's it's a delicate balance in trying to find the sweet spot from a production standpoint. But we're 70 episodes in and we plan to be thousands of episodes in. So it's good to get all of these things worked out on the front end. Few housekeeping things. Again, we appreciate all the viewers and listeners worldwide on all the platforms. We are available on Rumble. We are available on Band.video. We've been mirroring the episodes on Band.video. I believe that War Room is going to start to mirror the episodes on warroom.org as well. I believe that's the site, warroom.org. As well as BitChute, if all else fails and we get brought down off YouTube or other platforms as well. We have a backup on BitChute, and we're still looking into getting our patron platform. Is the only thing we're waiting for with our patron platform is an update on the website, the Free People Radio website. And once we get that going, you'll be able to follow us and contribute and donate on Locals, on Subscribestar, and DonorBox. And you'll also be able to buy merchandise from the podcast. We have Spit on the Floor t-shirts coming soon, and I think Pete Booty Peg as well, and some other fun stuff for you guys, memorabilia from the show, and Professor Pins as well. So that's soon to come. We are available on all audio platforms, all major audio platforms. That'd be Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Google Play, and Spotify. So you can go and follow and listen to us there as well. Please don't forget to leave a review. Give us a 5-star review if you're so inclined, or give us a 1-star review if you think the podcast is shit and yours truly, the host, is full of shit as well. So whatever you want to do, just give us a review, okay? We like the controversy as well. Other than that, the Hebrews podcast will be coming soon. We don't necessarily have a start date in mind. We'll keep you up to date. We'll keep you, caught up on that, the progress of that, or the anticipated launch date of that podcast with myself and Professor Penn. The main thing is just my travel schedule right now and trying to figure out when we would be able to film that podcast once a week. So stay tuned for that, because that one's sure to be entertaining and funny. I think Professor Penn and I in that setting is going to be more entertaining and than it is educational. When you see two friends sit down, much like myself and AJ Barker, who will also have our own podcast, The Last Renaissance, over at The Last Renaissance YouTube channel. It's just a different dynamic. It's a different dynamic. We have a little bit more fun, and we want to add that in. Not that this isn't a time for serious conversations or serious people, but there's a balance, and we can be so caught up in the war and the fight that we forget to enjoy ourselves and enjoy our lives somewhat. And even soldiers at battle, actually on the combat field, found ways to entertain themselves and have a little bit of fun and find some joy in the day and in a time where it's very dark. So the Hebrews podcast should be a fun one. The Last Renaissance podcast should be a fun one. And we have a couple more in mind as well. The Royce White show will be a Saturday night primetime show. It's a little bit more produced. This is a more podcast setting. The Royce White show will be more of a show where we do call-ins and we do reaction videos live, and we may even stream it live, and we may play a little bit of music in that one as well. So the Royce White Show is going to be probably a 2-hour Saturday night primetime show. So stay tuned for that. That will be on the Royce White USA, youtube.com/ Royce White USA. That will be on that channel. And as you can see, we're trying to spread the content around to avoid the threat of censorship. And, in that vein, it's no wonder that after just singing Elon Musk's praises somewhat, I sang his praises somewhat in yesterday's episode, on Wednesday's episode, I sang his praises somewhat. After singing his praises, I wake up this morning and I am suspended on Twitter for 7 days. Now, I couldn't possibly imagine what I've said in the last couple of days or couple of weeks that would warrant a suspension from the newly liberated and free speech stalwart Twitter. Honestly, I mean, I went back through the tweets. I'm still able to view my own tweets, and I went back through the tweets, and they didn't even give me an option to delete the tweet that was in question, which is really strange. I know I've seen many people who had gotten into some trouble on Twitter, suspended and whatnot. They were given the option to delete whatever tweet it was. I wasn't even given that choice. It's real peculiar, to say the least. I know in the last couple of days, some of the more controversial, what many would say are controversial tweets had to do with RFK Jr., a potential presidential ticket with RFK Jr. and Donald Trump. Obviously condemning the LGBTQ, which I will do, with no shame whatsoever. And then talking about the NBA, and I don't know if you get a chance, go to my Twitter. I posted a clip from Paul George's most recent podcast with Draymond Green, and if you remember, Draymond Green and I were drafted in the same draft. We're part of the same draft class. And, Draymond and I are also very unique in that we were compared to each other, number one, but we had very unique skill sets in that we were sort of the pinnacle hybrid all-around player, can contribute in multiple ways. They used to call it versatile. A lot of people during my era and through my era started to call it hybrid players. And it's just an all-around versatile guy who can contribute in multiple ways in the game. And evidence of this was Draymond and I's college career. And again, we're very unique in that both of us led our team in multiple major stat categories. I led my team in 5 major stat categories. Draymond Green led his team in 4. I went to Iowa State. Draymond Green went to Michigan State. 2 Midwest boys. I believe Draymond Green is from the great city of Saginaw in the great state of Michigan. Myself, I'm from the Twin Cities, obviously, here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. But there's a Midwest mindset that kind of pervades the entire Midwest. You get to Michigan and you're teetering on the line between the East Coast and the Midwest. But really, Detroit, the whole Detroit, Michigan area is really the greater Midwest area. And you can tell. I mean, you look at a player like Draymond and myself, we're very similar. Play with a lot of passion, play with a lot of grit, tough, take pride on defense. Very selfless, right? Very unselfish players and very, very high IQ players. And I don't think there's a better motif for the Midwest mindset. And I'm proud of that. I've always took pride in being from Minnesota when I went to go play on any national stage or in any national environment. And I've always been proud of the Midwest. I've been proud of other guys that come from the Midwest. Not to be tribal or anything, but we should take pride in where we come from and where we come from, both locally, both state, and even regionally, usually tends to have some similar qualities to it, mostly because of the weather and, kind of the overall setup and format of society in the place that you live regionally has a lot to do with the weather. For example, people in Texas, they don't worry about snow. So they play a lot of basketball outside, for example, and they play year round. And in the Midwest, you're more confined to the gym during certain times. On the East Coast, there's really, really big, condensed, populated areas like New York City, and then they got their parks and their playground legends as well. And then you get down to the East Coast and that corridor, and you have sort of the offshoot of playground basketball in places like Baltimore and DC and Philly and so on and so forth. So everybody has their own kind of little thing. Not to say that they're big differences, but just personality wise, especially when it comes to athletes. Amongst the athletes, you can always kind of tell the guys that are from certain places. It's funny, just little mannerisms. But anyway, in this podcast clip, Draymond Green was very gracious towards me in his recollection of my game and my skill and our interaction in the pre-draft process. And in that pre-draft process, he and I were paired together in workouts across the entire pre-draft camps. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, after every college season, those players that are looking to make the jump to the NBA and potentially are going to be drafted engage in a pre-draft workout process where a team will invite 5 to 6, 7 players for a weekend to work out, and you usually play a variety of you go through your workouts and things like that, and then you play a variety of competitions, 3-on-3, 2-on-2, 1-on-1, stuff like that. So Draymond Green and I were paired together in the entire pre-draft process, partly because our games were very similar. But Draymond in this clip, in this recent podcast with Paul George, was very gracious to me in saying that, the context was that Draymond had a very infamous clip where he could recall every single player that was drafted before him from memory. And that just kind of tells you the type of guy Draymond is and how meticulous he is and how serious and passionate he is about the game of basketball. I respect Draymond greatly when it comes to basketball. But that clip went viral and he said my name. And obviously a lot of people, I remember when that clip dropped, a lot of people, picked me out of all of the, he went 35 in the draft. He named all 34 picks before him from memory on the spot. It was an incredible. You should go check that clip out if you get the chance. But a lot of people picked me out because for casual fans, again, if you go to Wikipedia, you'll have the New York Post or other mainstream media industrial complex publications, establishments, make the claim that I'm an NBA bust, and they try to dance around all of the other things that happened in the beginning of my career and why I've been blackballed. So, Draymond was gracious in saying, hey, listen, these guys that went before me, some of them I was pissed off about. And then he gets to, in this moment in the podcast, and he goes, another one I was pissed off about was Royce White. But I wasn't pissed off for the same reason. I wasn't pissed off because I was a better basketball player than him, because he was fucking nice. And, this is what he's saying. He was like, this guy was a little bit more, he did a lot of the same things I did, but he was a little more athletic and he had huge fucking hands. If you don't know, I have one of the top 5 biggest hands in the history of the NBA Combine. Now, I don't know how far back the Combine goes, and there may have been people with bigger hands than me before the Combine began, but since the inception of the Combine, where they measured hands on record, I'm in the top 5 of all time. Actually, another player from here in Minnesota, the great Trevor Mbakwe, who I love to death, we came up together, he was in that top 5 as well, with Kawhi Leonard and a guy named Nichols, Tyler Nichols, I think his name was, and Greg Smith, who I actually ended up playing with in Houston. So it was strange. All 5 guys who had the biggest hands came basically in the same draft class or in the same age group, which is really odd too. But anyway, Draymond was being very gracious and gave me very high praise, and I want to say thank you to Draymond Green. I really appreciate what you said and your compliment of my game. It means a lot. Draymond Green is without a doubt an all-time great and a Hall of Famer. I mean, he's 6, 7-time NBA All-Star. They've won 3 NBA championships, I believe, maybe 4. I'm not recalling well, but it's some. They've been to at least 5 NBA finals. So and Golden State effectively has changed the entire game of basketball from a cultural and philosophical standpoint. The run and gun threes that you see now, all the way down to the grassroots level, is a product of Golden State's success. But even more importantly, the ball movement, the baseline approach of ball movement in the game of basketball, in the NBA game, and all the way down to the grassroots level is largely a product of Golden State's success. And you have to give some of that. You have to give some of that credit to Steve Kerr. And you also have to give some of that credit to Greg Popovich, who Steve Kerr coached underneath before he became a head coach. And Greg was certainly somebody who emphasized ball movement. Now theirs was a little bit different because they had success in the true big man era, where guys were still throwing the ball down to the post to true big men like Tim Duncan, who was incredible, obviously one of the best power forwards of all time, if not the best power forward of all time. Certainly when it comes to his resume, people would make the argument that he's the best. I would argue that KG is the best, but I'm a Minnesota boy, so I'm obviously biased. But it's not to take anything away from Tim Duncan whatsoever. They're right there neck and neck. You could pick whoever you want. But San Antonio's ball movement was much different because they dumped the ball down into Tim Duncan a lot. And before that, they dumped the ball down into Tim Duncan and David Robinson. But once those two kind of got a little bit later in their career, a little bit older, you started to see Manu and Tony Parker and Patty Mills was a part of some of those later teams, and Kawhi Leonard, obviously. They kind of exemplified what ball movement would become, right? And so, Golden State's reign came a little bit after that, or, transitioned right after that. And Golden State has changed the game of basketball. And Draymond Green's unselfishness, Draymond Green's role on the Golden State Warriors team allowed for and greatly contributed to the change in basketball all around the board. And people wouldn't understand it. I mean, I think Draymond, I'm not just saying this because he gave me some credit. When it comes to basketball, regardless of how I feel about people politically and whatever else, I'm going to tell you what it is from a basketball standpoint. It's the same with LeBron James. If anybody has anything ill to say about LeBron James's basketball skill, you're just a hater. I mean, it's ridiculous. The man is like a medical and scientific miracle when it comes to athletics and the game of basketball. He's incredible by any metric. And quite honestly, he is the most versatile basketball player we've ever seen in terms of all across the board. He can guard multiple positions. Now he's having a little bit of trouble because he's 40 years old, but just traditionally speaking, he could guard any position. He could play any position. And he could play it successfully. I mean, with great success, with great production. And he's just a freak athlete. I mean, you're talking about a guy with a 40-something inch vertical. Probably in his prime, he was probably running a 4.340, 4.240. He's just and strong. He's 260 pounds. I mean, it's one thing to want to run a 4.240. It's another thing to be 265 pounds and run a 4.240. Unbelievable athlete. So I give people their credit where it's due. And Draymond Green, I think, doesn't get the credit he deserves for really changing the game of basketball. I mean, he really contributed to Golden State changing the game of basketball. Now, Steph Curry obviously is the best shooter of all time, in my opinion. Klay Thompson's a very close second, in my opinion. You could put Ray Allen and some other people up there, but Klay Thompson is right up there as well. So they had all of the tools to be able to have the success that they've had. You had to have a coach that would allow them the freedom to do those things. That's number one. But you also had to have players who were willing to sacrifice their own personal ambitions, their own personal statistics, their own personal glory, limelight, in order to help Stephen Curry and Klay Thompson had the success they had. And Golden State had that, and Draymond Green was a huge piece of that. Andre Iguodala was a huge piece of that. Some other players that played on those early Golden State teams were a big piece of that. But Draymond Green really was like the X factor and glue guy. And even more than offensively and him being unselfish, defensively, the things Draymond Green does go very unheralded. Now, I don't know if I would say Draymond Green is the best defender of all time, but he's certainly a very good one. And measuring by how many championships Golden State won, he can make that argument. But all that being said, again, I appreciate the compliment from Draymond Green, and he even went so far as to say, I think if the stuff hadn't happened with Royce and mental health, he would still be dominant in the NBA today. And that's the one that I kind of want to talk about, and I really appreciate him saying that. Number one, I still think that Draymond and the rest of my counterparts in the NBA don't really have a good understanding of what went on between me and the NBA, and me and the NBA higher-ups. I think, and because I know, and how many of these players' lives work, a lot of the things that they see and read, they're just reading on the fly, and unless they have a personal connection to it for some reason, for any number of reasons, they'll skim through it and they'll skim by it. And the mental health conversation at the time in 2013 was so convoluted. It was so warped, to say the least, and it was so dangerous to the establishment that they did their absolute best to try and douse any flame that would spark from it and influence or impact other players or other people or any type of grassroots movement around it. The mental health conversation has been co-opted since the day I said what I said on the world stage. I mean, right from there, they've been going to work on co-opting the narrative. And they were able to do it through the liberal establishment, through the liberal, through the sort of liberal mentality of mainstream media. And that mentality is, hey, some things may actually be an issue, but we need to make them an issue, how we need to make them an issue in order to benefit in the way that we need to, both politically, corporately, and so on and so forth. And the mental health was no different. Like when I came on the scene, I said, mental health is the greatest social issue we face, bar none. Racism, misogyny, bigotry, xenophobia, Islamophobia, all of them pale in comparison to mental health. Why? Because, like I said on Wednesday, mental health is more at the root. And mental health, I'll say again, for those who may be new to the podcast, mental health is another way to say the human condition. Right? It's not about the DSM. It's not about anxiety and depression, or like myself having aerophobia, they call it, where you have a fear of flying or fear of heights, right? And it's not about the phobias and things like that. Mental health is a way to say the human condition, where the mind, body, and spirit meet, where they converge into the perceivable existence. It's like one step before consciousness. And consciousness remains the greatest mystery and the fundamental pillar of the human existence. But right after consciousness comes mental health, sort of this super highway, of this, I would say this super highway of where the mind, the body, and the spirit converge. And that's why you see many people who suffer from mental health issues or mental health conditions tend to struggle physically, and there's a physical ramification from that. And certainly you can make the argument that there's a spiritual ramification. And the same goes with your physical health, and the same thing goes with your spiritual health. There's kind of a revolving door around those three things. And so I wanted to have that conversation, and the NBA said, hey, we don't want any part of that conversation. Why? Well, I would say, or I would later find out, or I would later start to see that the real reason why the NBA and the entire global corporate community didn't want to have a real conversation about the human condition, and even more so mental health or the human psychology as a spearhead for that discussion about the human condition is because they had already laid plans through the technology, through the technocracy, to hijack the human psychology and get everybody hooked on dopamine, to get everybody hooked on dopamine and to get everybody hooked on serotonin. And your casual fans or your shills for the liberal establishment or your cucks for the establishment or your grifters or your race pimps or whoever else that has a vested interest in the establishment's narrative, they'll say, no, you just weren't good enough to play, or you just should have flown. If you would have flown, everything would have been fine. And that's where I'm going to get down into the shit today. Okay. But first, I want to thank Draymond Green again. And I want to say that I think what Draymond Green was trying to say is, from a skill standpoint, from a basketball standpoint, there's no doubt that I had everything needed to be a good NBA player to have a long NBA career, if not a dominant NBA career. Draymond Green's not somebody who just throws words around, especially now when it comes to basketball. He's very particular. Like I said, he could run off every name in the NBA draft, 34 picks before him, from memory. And you could watch him, how the way he plays, and you can tell that he has a sort of spatial genius and photographic memory to himself. And even when it comes to his matchups and remembering certain tendencies from certain players, he's very intelligent that way. So when he says dominant, I don't think that he's exaggerating. And I don't say that just because it's myself, because I too believe that if I was on the right team, in the right situation, with the right coach in the NBA, still to this day, like right now today, that I would be a dominant force. The difference between, from a basketball standpoint, and then I want to get into the details of that part of what Draymond said about the mental health piece. But from a basketball standpoint, the differences between Draymond Green and myself are, I think Draymond Green in his college career had a little bit better motor. Now, I will say on my own behalf, I was much heavier than Draymond Green. I walked around in college at around 275. I think Draymond Green was around 245 or 250. So that's another 30 pounds. It's a 30 pounds that I've since cut. I mean, you can see my body now is much, much leaner than it was even when I was at Iowa State. And that's just, sometimes your baby fat comes off of you when you become a more mature man. More of it had to do with my MMA training and the effect that had on my body, because it's completely different type of training. And my diet as well changed when I crossed over to MMA. But because I was a little bit heavier, I think that allowed Draymond, to get the nod when it comes to having a motor. Another piece of it is my game was much more change of pace, change of direction than Draymond Green's. In basketball lingo, you could say I had a little more shake in my game than Draymond Green does. A little more natural shake. I had a little more hesitation in my game than Draymond Green does. Draymond Green was a very fundamentally sound, get the ball, rip by you, make the next play. And he was very good at that and very efficient. And it worked perfectly for the Golden State system and complemented Stephen Curry and Klay Thompson greatly. Again, I think he was the X factor in them winning those championships, along with the incredible shooting and ice cold veins of Klay and Stephen Curry. So I had a little more shake in my game. But the other significant difference in Draymond Green's game and I is, number one, I'm a little bit bigger than he was height-wise. I'm a little taller. But because I was a little bit taller and a little bit heavier, I had a legitimate back to the basket post game where I think Draymond Green could post you up. Yeah, he sometimes would post you up, but he was better off the pinch post. The pinch post is also known as the high post, the elbow area around the free throw line on either side. He would post up, but his post up game was more facilitator based. My post up game was, I could actually back guys down all the way into the paint and finish through contact and things like that with soft touch. So that was one of the slight differences in my game. And again, Very similar game, very similar games in terms of just being versatile. And versatility is something that's hard to teach. It's an anomaly. It's an anomaly amongst anomalies, right? Because you have to get the right combination of size, skill, and mentality. Size, skill, and mentality is what makes a player versatile. And it's a rare combination. Stephen Curry being able to shoot the ball from 35 feet with great ease. That's an anomaly, right? That's rare, certainly a rarity. Being able to, jump out of the gym, 40-inch vertical, that's an anomaly. But being versatile, being able, being a jack of all trades is kind of what we're talking about. That is super, super unique in the game of basketball. And it's coveted, right? And that's why what Draymond Green's saying has merit, because he knows, like I know, like any real basketball fan, coach, scout, commentator, who's going to be honest, will tell you that my skill set, where the NBA evolved to, was tailor-made for my skill set. My skill set is coveted right now today. And you look at another guy who's really versatile like a Ben Simmons, and Ben Simmons is getting a bad rap, and I appreciate Draymond Green defending Ben Simmons and talking about how the only problem with Ben Simmons, the only difference with Ben Simmons today is his confidence for some reason. He's another guy at 6'10" who virtually can play and guard any position that's just having a tough go of it right now, who also ironically ended up mentioning mental health as one of the reasons why he was struggling and may be still struggling. And maybe it is mental health. I'm not sure. I don't know him personally, but if he says it is, it probably is. If anybody would lie about that, then they're probably suffering from a mental health issue anyway. But Ben Simmons was compared to me as well. The difference between Ben and I is I think I shoot the ball better than him naturally. Ben's very reluctant to even shoot the three-point shot. I have no problem shooting a three-point shot, although I understand passing up. There's a certain appreciation that's missed from a guy who's been a star all his life and passes up good shots for great shots. And to have the humility to be humble enough to understand that, hey, I'm playing with J.J. Redick. Just do a name out there. I'm playing with J.J. Redick. He can shoot the ball better than I can. At 6'10" and versatile, it's easier for me to get J.J. Redick an open shot than it is for me to sit out here and take the three myself. I understand that. When I played at Iowa State, I led the team in assists because I went out of my way to get other guys whose game was very predicated around shooting the ball. I went out of my way to get them shots. So a little bit of basketball talk, a difference between myself and Draymond. Again, I appreciate what he said, but I want to talk about the belief that had I not had the issues with mental health, then I'd still be dominant today. From a basketball standpoint, yes. From a political standpoint, no. And, I think about this often because I have people who I came up with, whether it was in high school, whether it was through the draft process or college, who are still very, very active and successful and productive in the NBA today. So I often think about this and I ask myself, man, let's say I had punted on the mental health conversation. What would the trajectory of my career had been? And when I start to really play it out in my mind, when I start to go through it in my mind, I think to myself, how long would it have been before the China topic came up? How long would it have been before the vaccine topic came up? How long would it have been before the LGBTQ topic came up? Now, I was drafted in 2013, and the wokeism in the NBA really didn't start to bounce around until 2017, 2018, I would say. Although the BLM and the Trayvon Martin stuff started out pretty early. That was actually the year right after I was drafted. And then Colin Kaepernick, that whole deal went down. So there was more politics that were, being discussed in the sports context around Colin Kaepernick. But the NBA going full-blown woke really wasn't until 2020. I mean, full-blown, way, way out there. And with that, shilling for China and then shilling for the medical industrial complex and the entire New World Order. And I just don't feel like had I been silent about mental health, had I punted on mental health, that I would have survived speaking honestly about China or the vaccines or the LGBTQ. That's my personal opinion. So, when Draymond says, had it not been for the mental health, he'd still be dominant in the league today. For sure, all things fair and equal. But we certainly know that the world isn't that way, and I'm fine with that. But the reality is, had I spoke out against China the way that I have in my exile, I would have surely been blackballed for that. And there's a reason why none of these players, including Draymond Green, respectfully won't speak out against China. There's this sort of unspoken knowledge that if you speak out against China, or if you speak out against anything anti-establishment with too much force, that you could be taken out, at least from a basketball standpoint. And it's funny because Adam Silver even said, after they decided to put in a mental health policy that I helped the NBA write, and then they took credit for it like it was their idea, which is what liberals do all the time. It's kind of a common motif of the metropolitan, the cosmopolitan, omnisexual white liberal. It's kind of their entire MO, actually. They're a, they're dishonest in that way, right? So I got together with some doctors and put together a mental health policy, or proposed a mental health policy that was very, very basic, very run-of-the-mill. Didn't put all the power in the hands of the players. I said, hey, let's just have guys come together and talk honestly about whatever it is they're struggling with, and with the understanding that if a guy tries to suppress the stuff he's dealing with and copes through alcohol and drugs or gambling or whatever it is, then he's just going to shorten his career, and it's going to end up making you pay more in the end. And it's a win-win for everybody if people can talk honestly about what they're dealing with and collaborate to get through it. They didn't want to do that. They didn't want any part of that. And it's funny that the mental health policy that would come a few years after me, when Kevin Love started to talk about his anxiety, and then DeMar DeRozan, and then this avalanche or this sort of snowball effect of players and coaches and even referees that would talk about their own mental health issues. The policy that actually came out of that moment was completely fluff. I mean, it was completely fluff. The whole point was, you want people to be able to talk honestly about the stuff they're dealing with without the fear of penalty from the team. And not just the fear of penalty, but the fear of penalty that's not based in actual knowledge, that's not based in truth. For example, if I say I have seasonal depression, just as an example, if I say I have seasonal depression and the GM looks at that and goes, well, he has seasonal depression, we're not going to pay him as much, or we're not going to offer him as much, or we're not going to offer him a contract for as long because he's sort of unreliable, that would be completely inappropriate. And it would be completely inappropriate on the foundation that, what does your average basketball GM know about mental health? What does your average basketball GM know about medicine? For that matter, what the fuck does Adam Silver know about mental health or medicine? Or what does anybody who has any real authority in the NBA front office or community know about medicine? No, they rely on other doctors to inform them on all of their medical policy. When it came to me, and I went to each one of their doctors and brought up mental health as a point of as a place that needed to be further explored in terms of the collective bargaining agreement and the overall culture and attitude, all of their doctors agreed with me. And that's why I'm not playing in the NBA, because they couldn't take the fact that I was right and that they were wrong, and they doubled down on being wrong. And that sort of let me into this world of these corporate oligarchs and elites doubling down even when they know they're wrong, even when in other situations they would throw all of their full faith. They would throw their full faith into these certain individuals to advise them on certain matters that they were uneducated about. But when it came to the young 21-year-old speaking out of turn and he went to their doctors and their doctors agreed, they said, well, fuck the doctors too in their opinion. Their opinion is only valid when we want it. MO of the corporatocracy writ large all around the world, and COVID would show us that, right? Certain doctors all of a sudden got iced out, and their illustrious career of being very accredited and very, very successful in their contribution in the medical field was all of a sudden null and void. So when I went to their doctors and we put together this proposal and the NBA rejected it, all of a sudden Kevin Love pops up, says he has anxiety, and hey, the proposal has a lot of the elements that I suggested, with one significant difference. And the one significant difference was there was really no protection around the players for offering up this personal and private information. No real protection from the players. In fact, Adam Silver was on stage with Bill Simmons in the Analytics Sloan Conference, which is founded by Daryl Morey in the Northwestern Math Department or whatever it is, turning basketball into a nerd's game, a nerd fantasy game is what they're doing. You know, again, trying to use math and science to neglect and negate and delegitimize spatial genius is what they're really trying to do. The feel for the game, the nuances, they're trying to math out the nuances of the human condition, which is right in alignment with their flippant attitude towards mental health and the human condition altogether. They think it's some math equation, which is why the world is pretty fucked up today, because their math is a little funky. So anyway, Adam Silver says right up there on stage with Bill Simmons, yeah, we want players to access, because at this time they had made it mandatory that every team had a mental health consultant or doctor or physician on their staff full time, which was something that I had written should just be there anyway. I mean, if you have a full-time team doctor and a full-time orthopedist, you should have a full-time mental health doctor, just good practice, comprehensive health. Nobody with any sense would argue that comprehensive health model is the best way to do it. In fact, the insurance companies, on the back end of the insurance scam or insurance policy, it's the lack of comprehensive health model that has led to the broken medical care system that we have today. I mean, it's all connected. I mean, it really is all connected. You don't get a comprehensive health model. You get a blanket, one-size-fits-all prescription from an amalgamation of people who have tests that Big Pharma have funded, hospitals and things that have gone right or wrong with them, and insurance companies and price setting and really price gouging. It's not comprehensive. It's not individual based. It's not I mean, you get a good doctor, yeah, he'll help you do that. But the system of healthcare in this system is based on a one-size-fits-all model, which is why the impulse of the medical system during the pandemic was to blow people's lungs out with ventilators, or vaccinate everybody, or give everybody who was hospitalized remdesivir, or make everybody go home, if they weren't, already dying, or whatever the case may be. I mean, it was just a complete shit show. It showed the flaws of our healthcare system in so many ways. And I'm just giving you an example of how the NBA and my experience with them gave me an insight into the mentality that would lead to these things later on. So the whole point of the mental health policy that we proposed, myself and the other doctors involved from the NBA community, was to take away any penalty from the players sharing the things that they were struggling with. And really financial penalty, economic penalty. Not that if a team decides, hey, we don't want a guy who has anxiety issues. Not that that's wrong of them, or they have no right to do that. Now, certain people will make a claim that that mental health conditions fall under the scope of the Americans with Disability Act, the ADA, and that the ADA prevents certain employers from discriminating against people with disabilities in terms of hiring, okay, or firing. I would actually argue that there's a lot of leeway to that. And even more so, I would argue that the way the LGBTQ has now come and tried to hijack mental health and the mental health conversation makes it exceedingly dangerous to give that type of authority to your employees or to your employees' unions around mental health conditions and claims, because it's now going to be used where a man will cut off his penis and say, hey, if you don't affirm my gender identity, you're discriminating against me. Or if you don't hire me, you're not hiring me because I'm a trans lesbian, which is just a complete a complete hijack, a complete aberration of what the mental health conversation should really be about. It's not by accident. I mean, the LGBTQ is hijacking all kinds of stuff in the interest of chaos and utter lunacy. So the mental health conversation isn't escaping that, and in fact, it's pretty prominent. But still, we wanted to try and create a policy where not so much that a team couldn't get rid of, cut, trade, or not sign a free agent because he has a mental health condition, but that the GMs would actually understand the prevalence of mental health, the prevalence of these mental health conditions, how to actually measure the prevalence of these mental health conditions, and thus be able to make an accurate and fair assessment of whether or not this mental health condition should impact their decision in the way that it may, right? So I'll give you an example of this. It's like, let's say player A, let's use Kevin Love. Player A comes and he says, hey, I'm dealing with anxiety. And let's say the team owner and the GM and the team lawyer have no fucking clue what he even means when he says anxiety. They don't know. I mean, they went to fucking Wharton Business School or the Jerk Off Academy of Liberal Sciences or whatever. So they have no clue what he means when he says anxiety. They have no clue about the numbers of anxiety or mental health conditions around the country or per demographic or whatever the case may be. They're just completely in the dark. All they know is some stigma, right? Some stigma that they've come across about the issue. And so they say, hey, we're not signing you because we don't need a player with anxiety. Little do they know, most of the players on their team are suffering from anxiety. They just may not be courageous enough to actually say something about it. They may not indeed know what to call it. They may not actually understand that that's what they're suffering from, but they still may be suffering from anxiety. So it would actually be a net negative for the NBA. And this was I was trying to tell the NBA. It would be a net negative for the NBA to have their decision makers, owners, coaches, GMs, lawyers, have their decision makers make decisions about mental health in a way that's uninformed from an economic standpoint, from a basketball standpoint, because now you may be missing out on a player because he says, hey, I'm actually suffering from this. And you think, oh, we don't want guys who suffer from that. Little do you know, again, like I said, 8 other players on the team are suffering from it as well. And even more so, the one player who came to you and wanted to talk about it may actually be trying to cope with it in a healthy and rational way, in a mature way, where the other 8 players may be trying to cope with it with alcohol and drugs and gambling and sex and video games or whatever the case may be, may not be healthy. And they may actually come to bear on the overall success of the team and really the overall value of the product. The NBA being a product itself, and the players and their play and their talent and skill and the display of such being a product. So this is just one of the ways where capitalism has really, played a sick joke on itself, and thinking that the markets will tell everybody everything we need to know. It's not true, and in fact, many people are sabotaging their own goals in the market they're in. And if you want to connect this, if you want to go from the local to the global, or you want to connect this, the micro to the macro, the moral hazard from the Fed and the moral hazard from the DC swamp and bailing out big companies, making big companies too big to fail, or the American people buying into companies in a way that doesn't allow them to fail, sort of sets this precedent or creates this culture or this normalcy where you can get away with cutting corners and still be successful. And you can still justify that success to your stockholders or your shareholders because it's comparative. You're only good or bad by comparison. And the NBA has gone unchecked, and they've gone out of their way to set up a business model that's unchecked, which is why if you want to own a team, you have to be accepted by all the other owners in order to do so. That price setting, that gatekeeping, like Ice Cube was talking about, is a way for them to is actually a way for them to set the constraints on the market, which makes it impossible for anybody outside of that group to compete. And it gives them a lot of leeway to make a lot of mistakes, an inordinate amount of mistakes, especially culturally and attitude-wise, especially with how they steward the game. And I'm not saying that they haven't done an incredible job of stewarding the game, but it's only good or bad by comparison. There's nothing to compare it to. We don't know what an Ice Cube would have done with a professional league. We don't know what such and such would have done with a professional league and how it would have grown and how the game would have grown and how the product would have blossomed and been productive and the value of it. We can't know those things. And we can't know those things because the NBA and its ownership is a cartel, just like the international banking cartel. And they price set, and then they price gouge, and they make it impossible to compete. That's what it is. So we try to set this policy. And again, Adam Silver sat right on stage with Bill Simmons, and he says, look, we want our players to access the mental health services available to them. We want them to. They can go access their own services as well. But if they access the team services, I can't guarantee that when it comes time for free agency, that it won't impact their contract. He said that publicly. Well, if you're a player, why would you ever go use the team's mental health services? Why would you ever try and collaborate with your team around a comprehensive health strategy, especially when health is so integral to a player's overall success and productivity? I mean, we're talking about athletes here. We're not talking about people who sit in the office and work at a computer, although health is really integral to their productivity as well. But for athletes especially, I mean, the whole business is their health and their ability to be able to be healthy enough to translate their skill into a product and add value and then a profit. So, why would you ever use the team's mental health services if the commissioner of the league is saying publicly he can't, as the commissioner, ensure or guarantee that bias won't be brought against you in your free agency? No, what he should have said was, we're going to do everything we can to educate all of our team's decision makers, every decision maker in every organization. We're going to do everything we can to inform them and educate them about the importance of mental health, what we know about mental health, so that when it comes time for players to collaborate with their teams around mental health, those owners and coaches and lawyers and GMs have the best information possible or the most information possible to make a real informed decision. And anybody out there amongst those decision makers who takes it upon themselves to venture out of the scope of accepted medical knowledge and bring bias against players or weaponize mental health against players to create leverage, an economic or financial leverage in free agency, the NBA office is going to come down with the full force against that individual or that group of individuals or that organization. That's what he should have said. That's leadership. That's what leadership really is. And I'm not saying that would have solved everything, because you still got the LGBTQ coming to hijack mental health, and you got the woke liberals hijacking mental health, and Adam Silver's a woke liberal himself, so I'm sure he would have fucked it up in grand fashion anyway. But the point, you understand my point. You understand, and from that you can start to see you can start to see where the corporatocracy showed myself, the entire NBA community, and really the entire world, its fans, its casual fans, and anybody else, that when it comes to medicine, when it comes to authoritative sources or accredited or expert sources, they're flying by the seat of their pants. They're taking it only when it fits the narrative. And I know you're thinking, well, how does that tie into vaccines or COVID? Because if I would have been there when the bubble happened and they mandated the vaccines in the bubble, or they mandated the vaccines, actually they never mandated the vaccines for the players. They mandated the vaccines for everybody else. Remember, Kyrie Irving wasn't allowed to play because the city of New York mandated the vaccines. And it's, every NBA, anyway, that's another story. But had I been there, I would have asked the question right there at the press conference and said, why, when we were talking about mental health and all of the doctors and experts had an opinion about mental health, why was it arbitrary whether or not the NBA should follow that recommendation? Now, when the CDC and all this stuff is going on with the global pandemic, now we're supposed to follow the CDC and all these authoritative medical experts, hook, line, and sinker. Why is that? And obviously that would have been a step too far. Probably got you suspended at the time. Certainly Kyrie ran into the wrong end of denying the vaccine. And it wasn't just, again, the NBA, they played the fence. It was like, oh, well, it's not us. It's the city of New York. And it was Mayor de Blasio's fucking cuck of the year. That year, he was the cuck of the year doing his fucking, you get a free burger and French fries from I don't know what it was, Shake Shack or Five Guys or whatever the fuck it is out there in New York City. You get a free burger and French fries when you get vaccinated. I mean, just outright disrespecting black people or poor people. Like, you're so poor. You're so poor you can barely afford a fucking, cheeseburger meal, really. That we can incentivize you to take an experimental vaccine by giving you a free cheeseburger and fries. I mean, not even a week's worth. Not even a month's worth. Imagine how disrespectful. Imagine how demeaning that is. Imagine, this is the motif, not to go off on a tangent, this is the motif of the liberal establishment. And this is how the utter racism, but just dehumanizing mentality and attitude of the liberal Democrat establishment comes to the surface. You're so poor. You're so poor. You're so hard up. You're so hard up for cash, for money, because of our policies with the Fed and this sort of predatory economic piracy that we've done against the American working class through inflation or price gouging or whatever the case may be, taxes. It's all one big fucking Ponzi scheme. You're so hard up that we could convince you to take a vaccine by offering you a free cheeseburger meal. One free cheeseburger meal. You should be insulted. I don't understand. Some things are so insulting that it should, by default, disassociate you with the people who are promoting that message. Right? It's so insulting. It's just like, honest to fucking God. If you haven't seen the video, it's right there up on YouTube. They're not hiding this shit, which is even more insulting. It's like doubling down. It's adding salt to the wound. It's adding insult to injury. Right? First, they're saying you're too fucking poor to deny a cheeseburger and fries to get vaccinated, really aimed at homeless people. And then next, poor black people, Latinos, poor whites. And then after that, any fucking Tom, Dick, and Harry who has purple hair and wants to cut his penis off and claim to be a transgender lesbian. This is who it's aimed at in a row. But the Mayor de Blasio's, I wouldn't be surprised if he never even got vaccinated. Because he can afford cheeseburgers. He can't be incentivized by a cheeseburger meal. You should be offended by these things. You should be insulted. Had I been there at the time, I would have just simply asked, why, when it was mental health? Why, when it was the human condition? Why, when it was the effects in the outgrowth of a project meant to build an entire global economy, a modern global economy around dopamine and serotonin? Why, when we were talking about psychology, everybody wanted to punt? Everybody wanted to punt on what the doctors had to say. No. We're not listening to the doctors on this one. On this one, the doctors are just, that's their opinion, right? But when it's COVID and it's a vaccine and it's a pandemic and so on and so forth, the experts are the only opinion. And we all have to march in order, march in line. Same with China. I mean, I simply would have asked, and God bless Enos Cantor. Enos Cantor spoke out against it, and now everybody goes, oh, Enos was bad anyway. He was on his way out, or he spoke against it because he was on his way out, and him not being signed in free agency isn't because he spoke out against China. It's because he's old and he can't service it. Bullshit. Udonis Haslem, respectfully, and I like Udonis Haslem, got no problem with him. I think he's a good guy, and I get veterans being on the team and adding that presence. Udonis Haslem has a contract on the Miami Heat, and he can't play at all. You mean to tell me that a veteran guy in the locker room is equal to a guy who can actually service be a productive 7-foot big man in the league? Maybe, depending on the makeup of your team. Sure. And I guess Miami could look at it and go, hey, we needed Udonis Haslem's veteran leadership in order to deal with Jimmy Butler is really what it was, respectfully. And they had that moment during the year where Jimmy Butler was talking to Spoelstra, talking shit to Spoelstra, and Udonis Haslem was about to fight him for doing it. So that was an interesting moment, something that is evidence towards saying that in Miami Heat's case, Udonis Haslem was more valuable than maybe a Enos Cantor would have been. But across the entire league, I mean, come on, give me a break. There's not even that many 7-footers left anymore, and 7-footers are valuable. So I think Enos Cantor was kind of pushed out of the league because of China. Now, was Enos Cantor a great player? I mean, an incredible player, a star player? No, certainly not. But he could play. Interesting story. Myself and Enos Cantor were set to play at Kentucky together. He came to Kentucky the same year I was going to transfer to Kentucky, and we both would have had to sit out together. And I remember John Calipari telling me, if you and Enos come, I guarantee you both get drafted just from playing on the practice team. I would love to coach you, but I'm not going to get a chance to coach you because just from being at practice, we have so many NBA scouts, you're going to end up getting drafted after this season just from practice. And that's cool. Enos Cantor ended up getting drafted and never actually played a game at Kentucky, which is a testament of Calipari's, knowing his shit and actually being able to deliver what he says he can deliver. And he's got juice. I mean, he's got juice like that, and his program and the players he brings in has juice like that. So that was interesting. But I think it's just funny how small the basketball world is. And I would have actually been playing with Enos Cantor, and I didn't because I chose to go to Iowa State. But I think Enos was not targeted, but certainly penalized for his antics against China, and even more so LeBron James, right? Because he called LeBron out pretty tough, and he called the NBA and Adam Silver out pretty tough. And see, the way that it works in the NBA is kind of like a high school cafeteria. It's like nobody has to actually come and penalize you personally. They just put the word out. There's like an unspoken agreement. He's out. And then you come to the cafeteria one day and nobody will speak to you or nobody wants to sit with you. Punk shit. Little girl shit. Really, that's young teenage girl shit. And I don't mean that I don't say that to be sexist. That actually is the way that young girls operate. Young men do too sometimes, but it's more common amongst young women that they'll sort of try and isolate a young woman or a young man or somebody that they have a problem with. They'll come together as a group to isolate that person out of the society, out of the big society or the small society. This was what kind of this psychology, this sort of social proclivity is what led to the Me Too movement. 100%, which is why you can't trust the Me Too movement at all. If you know anything about the psychological science of adolescence, most of the psychological science that has been deployed to build the internet, to build the fourth industrial revolution, the Internet of Things, social media, so on and so forth, was greatly influenced by the psychological science in adolescence, the social and psychological science in adolescence. And what that science showed amongst adolescents is that men, young boys, are quicker to physical violence, physical confrontation, to settle social disputes, and women, young girls, are more they're more prone to gossip and reputation tarnishment. I mean, it's very, very old. It's in fact, it's one of the most uh, agreed upon. It's one of the most agreed upon social and psychological sciences there is amongst adolescents and people. I mean, so it's not even disputed. It's like it's run of the mill fundamental social science over countless studies. And for some reason, the Me Too movement is a believe all women. Like there isn't scientific evidence that when advantageous, women will group together in large numbers to isolate and go after somebody based on gossip and reputation tarnishment. I digress. So that's how they got Cantor. A bunch of bitch ass motherfuckers, basically looking at each other, winking, nodding, going, he's out, right? Can't deal with him anymore. He's a threat to the narrative, and more so, he's a threat to the money. Because the NBA's goal is to eventually venture off to China. The NBA has no allegiance to America. In fact, I think it was Commissioner Adam Silver that told a player recently, whose name I won't say because I don't have that player's permission to say this, but it's just out of respect. But we don't really need to know his name, do we? A player was told in recent times that there is no First Amendment in the NBA. He was brought behind the scenes in a back room and told, you realize the First Amendment doesn't apply, right? That we don't share First Amendment rights in the NBA. This is Adam Silver. Adam Silver told his player behind the scenes in a true snake weasel-like lawyer fashion that there is no First Amendment for the NBA players. And this is a common motif. I want you to understand this. The corporatocracy believes that it is above the United States Constitution. And the reason they believe it is because the law in our country, the jurisprudence in our country has been weaponized and hijacked through money so well that they know. It's not that they believe, they know. They have fundamental experience. They have lived experience that they can manipulate. They can bend the law to their will. That the rule of law is only as righteous as the people who set the law, who write the law into legislation. The rule of law is only as righteous as lawmakers, and it's only as righteous as those who uphold the law. And many of those people can be bought, and that's the great peril of capitalism. It's the great peril of modern society. It's the great peril of corporatism. We live in a corporatocracy, and we have NBA players right now who can, feel free. I mean, step right up and tell me if I'm lying. We have NBA players right now who have been brought behind the scenes and say, there is no First Amendment. You don't have First Amendment rights. You have a First Amendment right out there. You have a First Amendment right out there in the world. And there's a lot of you cuck, rhino, 501c3, 401k boomer conservatives that shill for this motif all the time. The corporation doesn't have to bend to the worker. It's a private corporation. They have a right to do whatever they want to do, blah, 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 blah. Shill, cuck, weenie, sellout motherfucker. You're a fucking sellout. Because what you're basically saying when you say shit like that is that the corporation exists independently of the United States Constitution. So you can't be pro-Constitution and be pro-corporatism. It doesn't work. You can only run that on some hillbilly hick motherfucker or some black bourgeoisie sellout who can't tell his fucking mouth from his asshole. You can't run that shit on anybody who has half a fucking brain, 1/4 of a fucking brain even. The United States Constitution is the highest authority in this nation, and the United States Constitution has that authority or claims that authority as an adjudicator of fairness and justice as laid out by the one true creator, which is why everybody has rights that are inalienable. It doesn't say that your rights are inalienable except for if you sign up or get hired to work a job in a corporation, and then the corporation becomes the highest authority. That's how this whole fucking thing got out of control. I want to come back to that in a moment, but right now I'm going to take care of a little business. We got a new advertiser. We got a new sponsor. And our new sponsor is MyBookie. Okay, we want to say thank you to MyBookie for being involved in the podcast and believing in the podcast. The Big 3 season is in full swing, and that can only mean one thing: time to throw down. From the biggest games to the smallest moments, you can make every bet worth your while with MyBookie. If you're asking yourself, why should you choose MyBookie over the competition? It's simple. They give you the best bang for your buck. Bottom line. Also, because MyBookie is the only betting service, to my knowledge, that has the Big 3 available in all forms. I believe so. I believe MyBookie was either the first or the only one to actually have where you can bet on Big 3 games. So I'm biased, right? Honestly, respectfully, I'm biased. A $100 bet on your squad to win the championship right now could net you $600. That's 6 times your money. You can't beat that. And you can find it all and more at MyBookie. Whatever your game is, sign up today and bet with house money. Just use promo code Royce to grab yourself a welcome bonus on your first deposit. You heard it here first. Promo code Royce to grab yourself some extra funds, redeemable all the way up to $1,000. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere with MyBookie. That's mybookie.com. Go to mybookie.com, use promo code Royce, and bet on the Big 3 this weekend. We're playing in New York City at the Barclays. Sure to be a fun one. I think we're the first game on CBS in a rematch of last year's championship against the Trilogy, which is sure to be an intense game, to say the least. I know we're going to come in looking to get a little bit of revenge for last year's championship game. We're coming off a really bad weekend against Tri-State, where the NBA veteran, NBA legend Jason Richardson single-handedly just beat the shit out of us, scored 30 points out of 50. For anybody who doesn't understand, scoring 30 points out of 50 is like scoring 60 in a real game. Your average NBA game teeters around 90 to 100 points, sometimes over, sometimes a little under. But, 100 points in a 4-quarter, 12-minute game, and then to play a game to 50 to a set score, it's really like scoring 65 points in a real game. And that's what Jason Richardson did the other day. And we got our ass kicked by about 20 points, which is one of the worst losses we've had on the Power since I've been a part of the team. So it happens. I mean, some days you just run into a team and you're not having a great day and whatever, so on and so forth. But we look to get back on the winning horse this weekend, and we're playing against Trilogy, the defending champions, at Barclays Arena, which we haven't been to in a couple of years. And I'm sure it's going to be sold out. And we got a bunch of New York City legends, which New York City is the basketball mecca. So it's going to be great to have Ice Cube out there in New York City, and this whole momentum around the Big 3 coming to the Big Apple and to the basketball mecca. So if you get a chance, go to MyBookie, lay down your wagers. And I'll say this: I'm not a huge gambler, but I will say I think sports is the one place where people should rightfully gamble. I mean, the whole sports thing was built around gambling. I would much rather people associate or tie gambling to sports than alcohol. I have a serious, not that gambling can't be a vice just as dangerous as alcohol, because surely it can, but not really. I mean, alcohol is a very physical vice. Gambling is a more exterior vice. And I have a real problem with this whole notion that in order to enjoy sports, it has to be accompanied by alcohol. Really, I think the alcohol hinders the ability to appreciate the beautiful nuances of sports in many ways. On the flip side, I think betting kind of locks people into the nuances of sports in many ways because there's a risk to it. When you go to a game just to get drunk and sort of escape the reality of all the problems in your life, you're trying to find this sort of blissful detachment when you're gambling and throwing down on a game. It's like I need to know as many details as possible if you're serious about it. Um, as a general principle, in moderation, right? Wine isn't a sin. Alcohol isn't a sin. In moderation, gambling isn't a sin unless unless it consumes you, right? And then all things become a sin. Hell, Facebook and even YouTube could be a sin if it's not done in moderation, and certainly many of us are plagued by that. So I want to say thank you to my bookie for joining on as an advertiser. We hope that we can get you guys some traffic. We hope that all of you out there will at least go to my bookie, do something, play a game, play blackjack, play something, do something, but bet on the big three if you're interested, and help the podcast out in that way. If you go and you support our advertisers and our advertisers see that you use the promo code Royce, hey, it's a win-win, and we continue to get advertisers to spend more money with us, and we grow, and eventually we get enough money to promote the podcast out to a wider group, and then you'll get to see my pretty yellow face on a more regular basis with more content, and so on and so forth. So mybookie.com, go ahead and visit today, and cast your bets. Okay. But back to the topic. Had it not been mental health with the NBA, as Draymond Green said, again, I appreciate him saying, hey, Royce would have been dominant today. And I think I could be dominant today. Realize I have no miles on my body. I'm not making a pitch to the NBA because me and the NBA are so cross. We're so ideologically opposed. I wouldn't last 2 weeks. Okay. I wouldn't, not because I'm wrong, not because I do something wrong, at least not in the mind of anybody who has sacred honor, but because there's such a pervasive culture of collective thought, collectivism in the NBA around politics and woke politics and liberalism in the New World Order. I'd be out of place. I mean, imagine me writing the United States of the Federal Reserve on the side of my head at an NBA game. I'd get a call so fucking quick, it'd make people's heads spin. Okay. Um, so, I appreciate Draymond Green saying that I'd be dominant. Again, I think from a basketball standpoint, I have no miles on me. I played 3 full seasons since I was 21 years old, since I was drafted. I played my 1 season at Iowa State, which I had to sit 2 years before I could even play at Iowa State. So I played my senior year at high school. I had to sit 2 years, which practice puts some miles on you a little bit. You could say that, but not as much as a full season for sure. So I sat 2 years, 1 at Minnesota, 1 at Iowa State. Then I played my 3rd year at Iowa State for 1 season, got drafted, played half a season in the D League in Houston, and then I didn't play again until 2015-16, which was in Canada. I played 2 full seasons in Canada. We won 2 championships. 1 year I was the MVP, led the league in triple doubles, led the entire league history in triple doubles. And then the next year I led the league in scoring and was runner up in the MVP behind Carl English. So, and I actually thought I should have won MVP, but Carl English is a Canadian legend and from Newfoundland, and he was in the twilight of his career, but still playing well, tough as shit to guard, could shoot the piss out of the ball, and he was second in scoring in the league behind me. So I opted out of the MVP voting um, on his behalf because I think he deserved it, and he deserved that recognition. And he was a Canadian, and it was respect, right? Because I respected him, I respected his game, and I was only 25 years old at the time, and I still had time to play, and I had already won the MVP award, so an MVP award wasn't really that significant to me. The respect was more important. So shout out to Carl English. He's a good guy, and I always enjoyed playing against him, competing against him, and in conversations. We had a real respect line between us. So I played those 2 seasons. That's 3 seasons. And then my first season in the Big Three was in 2019. And then in 2020, after the George Floyd stuff, I played, but I only had 4 games because I got COVID halfway through and missed 4 games. And then 2021, the entire Big Three season was canceled. Last year was our first year back. I played that season. So altogether, 3 Big Three seasons really amount to like 1 season, right? And not even that, because we don't practice multiple times a week. We don't, go through all of the wear and tear that you would during the regular season. So, all in all, I've played like 5 seasons in 10 years since I've left Iowa State. So you can make the argument that I'm a bit younger than I am. And I say that all to say, I think if I was playing in the NBA right now today, I would still be a guy who could guard multiple positions. I would still be a guy who could contribute in be productive in multiple areas on the court. I'm still unselfish, which is something you can't teach. It's either in you or it's not. You can be enculturated into unselfishness, but genuine unselfishness is something that's kind of in you or it's not. It can be contagious. It can rub off on other guys, but being born with it and just having it as a part of your constitution in sports and team sports is something that's hard to instill. Still unselfish, still pass the ball at a very high level, still see things before they happen. And I said back when I had the episode with Jokic, the number one skill in any sport is the ability to predict, the ability to anticipate, the ability to see things before they happen, to play a step ahead. It's the same in sports, it's the same in chess, it's the same in war and in combat, it's the same in fighting. The ability to predict with great accuracy what thing will happen or what general possibility of things will happen next. And I think I could do all of those things. So I appreciate what Draymond Green said, but I know in my heart, and I think if I sat down with Draymond, hopefully I can get him on the podcast at some time in the future. Although I know it would be somewhat risky and dangerous for him professionally. My speaking out against China, my speaking out against the vaccine mandates, my speaking out against the LGBTQism would have certainly had me cross with the NBA anyway, eventually. And when I look at it that way, I'm reassured that my first instinct towards the NBA and their overall worldview and their attitude and culture was the right one. That there was something dishonest in the edifice of the NBA's politics. But it also is a sad sort of scenario because now that I coach the young boys in the sixth grade, my own son, I look at all of these young men who aspire to play in the NBA purely for the desire to be at the highest level and compete at the highest level. It's a genuine love of competition, a genuine desire for that level of competition, and they if we cannot build a patriot economy or an alternative economy or a parallel economy, then all of our sports will continue to be hijacked by globalists, by New World Order shills, by New World Order, running dogs. And this is an important point. I think this is the most important point, that my story is one where you can see how I put a lifetime of work into a certain skill and craft, and the markets do not give us that. The markets do not always reward us. The markets sometimes, in many cases, are depriving us from exactly what we need. There are many people who message me all the time. We wish we'd be able to see you play in the NBA. We were cheated, right? People who really know basketball, we were cheated to see what you would have been able to do in the NBA. Because there's really nobody like you. Even if you think about Draymond Green, there's really nobody like Draymond Green, right? I mean, in the NBA today. And it's a beauty for people who really know basketball. It's a beauty to watch Draymond Green do the things that he does. It goes unnoticed. It goes unsung. People joke on it and he says certain things and people will refute it or whatever. But if you really know the game, the intangible things that Draymond Green brings to the Golden State Warriors or has in the past are almost invaluable, right? They can't even be quantified. It's hard to know unless you know the game. And I think I would have been able to do that at a slightly higher level. And I don't even really know what my ceiling would have been, right? I mean, I just don't know. I just don't know it. There's so much. For example, when we were in Dallas, I went to the Dallas Mavericks practice facility. We practiced at the Dallas Mavericks practice facility. Shout out to Kyrie Irving for re-signing a $100 and whatever it was, $80 million contract and being able to say what he said and stood on what he stood on and still being able to be in there. If Kyrie Irving, and I say this as a side note, if the reason why the NBA hasn't blackballed Kyrie Irving yet is simply because he's so good that the entire NBA community the entire NBA audience, viewers would have given a lot of backlash. And they know that because when they first tried to suspend Kyrie Irving, there was a boycott the NBA hashtag that went viral. That was the signal for them. They knew then they couldn't blackball Kyrie Irving. So I wouldn't be surprised if they called Cuban up or if somebody had that conversation and said, listen, we got to find this guy somewhere to play. Now, Cuban is a smart guy. He's sitting there going, well, hey, if we're not getting rid of the kid and we can't get rid of the kid, I'll take him because I want to win, because Mark wants to win. And he's like, hey, if he's going to be bouncing around, I'll take the Cuban's always kind of the guy who takes the troubled players, right? And he even did it with me. He called me, he goes, let's kick Daryl Morey and the Houston Rockets' ass, and we can do that. But before we do, you have to prove yourself over the course of 2 years in the D League. I rejected that because, he said to me, this is Mark Cuban. He goes, nobody is going to trust you. It's going to take 2 years before anybody trusts you. Motherfucker, nobody needs to trust me. What the fuck are you talking about? Trust me. You motherfuckers' trust is in question. You lying, corporate, New World Order, selfish, money-interested shills, you motherfuckers' trust is in question. Mine isn't. I'm as trustworthy as they come. I divulged information to you guys, private medical information to you guys, freely before the draft even came. All of you, not just the Houston Rockets, but the entire NBA community. I'm an open book. Being an open book is more dangerous than hiding information. That's something to be noted in our society today. So, I got some experience with Mark Cuban, but in general, he's not bad. I mean, all of these guys have been enculturated and indoctrinated with a corporatist mentality, with a radical materialist mentality, with a sort of global corporate globalist mentality. It's just what it is, right? And if you get me to talking about them, I'm not going to hold my tongue, but I don't really have a personal problem with a lot of them. Now, there are some I do, like Adam Silver, because he lied specifically with regards to me and my name, and he lied on the mental health topic, and that shit I don't respect. And I just know who he is. There are people who are going along with the scam, and then there are people who are progenitors of the scam, right? Adam and Daddy Silver, these motherfuckers are progenitors of the scam. Okay, the lawyers you find in New York City are progenitors of the scam. They are the scam. They're running the whole deal. Okay. I wouldn't be surprised if you see Greta Thunberg and the climate fucking racket start to show up courtside at the NBA. I digress. Point is, I'm at the Dallas Mavericks facility this past weekend, and I get a chance to shoot with the NBA ball, the real NBA ball. And I don't know what it was, but a lot of the hitches and things in my shot just sort of cleared up on their own after shooting for a while. I mean, I was shooting the ball at a very, very good clip with the NBA ball. And I'm not one to say that the Nikes don't have the best technology, that they haven't, created a great product. I'm not one to say that the NBA ball isn't a great special product and ball, because it is. And I felt it. That's why I play in Nikes, but I'll never stop speaking out about the Uyghurs or China's totalitarianism or authoritarianism, corruption. The CCP will never not speak out against it. But I'm just saying that I'm not one to deny that these people have made great products because I have a personal problem with their politics. So I'm shooting with the Dallas Mavericks ball with the NBA ball in the Dallas Mavericks facility, and it just dawns on me like, man, if I was shooting with this ball every single day for 7 seasons, I would be a fucking problem in the NBA right now. I mean, I'm just being honest, and I don't know what else to say other than that. It saddens me because part of me has that question in me of what would happen if I was able to play in the league today. How would I fare? And maybe we probably will never know unless something radical happens in the NBA with their culture, which is probably not the case because they're a cartel and they're actively trying to make sure there is no radical change in the NBA community. Hence why Kyrie Irving was bent over the table and lashed in front of the entire public for posting sharing the poster of a movie. And, I really appreciate the great Professor Penn, again, going out of his way the other day to say, hey, listen, as a Jewish man, I'm actually offended by the way people are using anti-Semitism as a claim and cudgel to try and silence truthful and honest dialogue. And I hope I wrapped everything together in a pretty bow for you. I hope I connected the local to the global, the micro to the macro. That's what we want to do here on this podcast. I did it using Draymond Green's very, very gracious, very kind compliment of my basketball game. I hope to have Draymond Green on the podcast at some point in the future, or maybe go on his, whatever the case may be. We can share some memories about our pre-draft workouts. He said there were some days where he destroyed me, and there were some days where I destroyed him, and that's probably true. I wouldn't dispute that. I love to hear which specific workouts he's talking about and be able to recollect that, because I'm sure there's some funny moments in there, and I would love for you guys to be able to see that too, because there really is a community and there really is a basketball community. And some of us go all the way back to grade school and early years in high school, the pre-draft process, college. Some of us go all the way back to childhood and the teams where my son is playing on now in the sixth grade years, sixth grade, seventh grade, junior high years. So, just makes for great stories. I love to be able to spend time again with my son's team and see them make those memories that they'll have forever. And I just hope by the time they get to, 6 years from now, 7 years from now, when it's time for them to pursue professional basketball, that the new world order doesn't have such a stronghold on professional sports. However that takes shape, these young people, these young, talented young men need the opportunity to display their talent and to share that talent with the world. And I don't, I talk on Whitlock a lot, on Fearless a lot about sports being a jerk off. It's not that sports isn't important or that sports doesn't have value. In fact, some of the greatest things that helped shape who I am came from participating in team sports. Unselfishness, self-sacrifice, being goal-oriented, hard work, putting in extra work, being dedicated, being meticulous, being methodical, preparation. A lot of things came from team sports that are very valuable for young people, but especially young men. So there's great value to sports. The corporatization, the commercialization, the financialization of professional sports, and thus its allegiance to globalism, elitism, oligarchy, and New World Order is what the problem really is. This has been another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio and now powered by our first sponsor, TireGet.com. That's TireGet.com. You all have to buy tires from somebody. You might as well buy them from us and help fund the movement, help support the movement. We believe in the freedom of movement, and that's exactly what the establishment wants to take from you now. I am your host, Royce White, here in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota. The fight continues. Don't die a jerk off, and as always, Godspeed.